When I'm out on my morning walk, I pass several people each day. Some people I pass quite regularly, and some just once in a while. I know which ones walk their dogs or which ones do their morning exercise routine like me. I know the ones who tend to be friendly, and I'll call them by name, and the ones who don't even look at me as we pass by within inches of each other on the sidewalk. Those are the ones that kind of make me feel concerned. Young or old, I feel like my heart withers just a little bit when folk walk by and don't even make eye contact. Perhaps it's a symptom of our society that apparently we are in that stage of constantly having our eyes focused on our screens, especially smartphones, that people spend so much time with their heads down. Eyes on phone screens have caused fatal accidents. Tragically, people have been hit by cars attempting to cross the street because they don't look up. And human connections, I feel, are diminishing because we simply don't look up. I apologize if I don't actually look at you the whole time I'm preaching, because now that I can't see my notes without my glasses, I'm working between the two. But even in preaching, it feels different when I make eye contact with each of you. In the story of Zacchaeus, I feel a special reminder to us to, like Jesus, look up. Look up and see the people around us. Look up and see the needs of our neighbor. Look up and hear the stories of people's struggles or worries. Look up and see how we can impact, even transform another's life because we know them. We know their need and we can respond to it. There are opportunities for hospitality all around us. Luke writes that when Jesus got to the tree, he looked up. Zacchaeus is described as a short man. He was a tax collector. He was an outsider, caught in the middle of two cultures, the culture of his Jewish birth and the culture of the ruling Roman Empire. He was looked down upon by both communities, not just because of his short stature. Disliked by his own people because he was the tax collector, disrespected by his Roman bosses because as a Jew, even though he worked for them, he would never be one of them. It's hard to imagine what Zacchaeus' life would have been like. Yes, he was rich in material ways, but had few friends. He was known as a crook, and when Jesus invited himself to his home, he was overwhelmed. He was stunned, so much so that he could hardly speak. He had climbed up a tree so that he could just catch a glimpse of Jesus as he walked by. Never in his wildest dreams did he think that Jesus would actually see him, never mind talk to him, and invite him to his home to receive his hospitality. It was mind-blowing. Hardly believing his good luck, he was delighted. Tom Billard, a Presbyterian church minister, writes that Zacchaeus had grown very wealthy by taking advantage of his position as a tax collector. He had cheated people. He had taken portions of earnings for himself. He was doing everything the way a tax collector of the Roman Empire of his time was expected to do. So one might wonder why Zacchaeus was interested in seeing Jesus at all. Had he heard about this traveling preacher who fed thousands with a few loaves and fishes? Had he heard that he raised folk from the dead? Had he heard the murmuring among his own people that this might in fact be the Messiah? Whatever he had heard, it had tweaked his interest, and so curious that he was willing to climb a tree to see him, so eager that he went against all convention and norms to meet Jesus. Despite his wealth, Zacchaeus was searching for something that he thought Jesus could give him. He too was looking to be fed, raised from the dead, offered a new life. Something in his heart told him that his life could be different. And maybe by changing his way of life, he might in fact make the lives of others better. When I was a teenager at my home church in Mississauga, I belonged to a group of folk from that church who gathered each Thursday night evening to sing and pray, to share our faith, to learn about how our lives might be different as followers of Jesus. I was the youngest, and the oldest member was probably over 70. Some were married and some were single. We were kind of a motley crew, but we were all nurtured and supported by one another on our journeys of faith. And I can remember a particular time when a new family, I think they were immigrants from some Eastern European country, I think, who had come to the attention of our minister. He met with the father of the family several times, and in their conversations, he learned that this gentleman was a baker by trade, but that since coming to Canada, he had not been able to continue in that line of work. And our minister had asked the gentleman what he dreamed of doing, and he had told him it was his dream to open his own bakery. He had been working odd jobs just trying to cover rent and living costs for his family, but was finding it very difficult to get anywhere, never mind save up for a business of his own. Our minister brought us this man's story and asked the broader congregation if there were those who would consider offering a loan or resources for him to start his own bakery business. And it was the first time in my life that I had been asked to do such a concrete thing to help lift someone else up out of economic insecurity. It was the first time I'd been part of a group who considered the needs of another and the means of offering assistance. It felt different than simply putting money in an offering plate. It felt real. It felt like we were making an impact on a person's life in a very tangible and concrete way. And so enough people in the congregation stepped forward with both loans and gifts to assist this gentleman in starting his bakery. A few years later, when I got married, I knew just where to go to order my wedding cake. Once Jesus got to the home of Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus said to Jesus, almost as a form of confession, "Master, I give away half my income to the poor, and if I'm caught cheating, I pay 4 times the damages." And Jesus says to him, "Today is salvation day in this home. Here he is, Zacchaeus, son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to find and restore the lost." I think the baker must have felt similarly. Today, salvation in this home. I too must admit I felt restored to have been able to help another, not just a hand out, more of a hand up. The words that really stood out for me in this passage read by Heather this morning was that Jesus came to find and restore the lost. Powerful words. Jesus didn't ignore the lost. Jesus didn't forget about the lost. Jesus didn't even avoid the lost. He actively sought out the lost around him and actively sought to find ways to restore their lives. Tom Billard goes on to write that churches are places where all economic classes are represented and are in dialogue. Churches are also places where Jesus' teaching of loving our neighbors should lead to a desire for economic justice for everyone in our society. Surely then, he concludes, churches should be a good place to consider how we can be inspired by Zacchaeus' to put God's call for economic justice into actions that lead to fairness as well as increased political and economic stability in our societies. I think this is an important part of what we call hospitality. Reverend John and I are frequently asked to respond to people who come to the church, sometimes to worship, sometimes by phone, to ask for assistance. It's why we have a benevolent fund, and it has been well supported and well used over the many years here at Trinity. I think each of us have had those times when we have needed to ask for assistance. And thankfully, many of us have been blessed by the help of others when we have needed it. One of the struggles for me, and Reverend John and I talked about this, is what to do with those who seem to have made a career out of seeking assistance. Some have not been raised with the knowledge or encouragement to make ends meet. Perhaps they have not learned the tools of how to manage their financial life. Sometimes because of situations or circumstances, they haven't had the opportunity for education or opportunities to find employment that is beneficial and ongoing to offer them stability in their lives economically. Sometimes generations of families or individuals rely on social assistance because that's their norm. I'm not sure that continually giving handouts is the best answer, because it's not really addressing the root cause of someone's economic instability. And I know for sure that there are many others who are far more experienced and knowledgeable about this dilemma that we have in our society as a whole for economic stability. But I think that is why we as a church and church members can be active in voicing our concerns, whether it's to our government, to our local politicians, to ensure, for instance, that all our neighbors have access to living wages. It's why we as a church are getting more involved in community projects and outreach to service the poor in our city. We are partnering to find ways to make housing more accessible or healthy food more available. But it is a complicated situation, and sometimes a struggle to figure out the best solutions rather than band-aids to some systemic problems of poverty in our midst. But I think the first step, as Jesus shows us, is that we must first have our eyes open to what is going on around us. We need to look up. We need to look around. And if we are the ones struggling, then we have to make an effort to be seen as well. We must work together to find and restore the lost, to find salvation, that healing of the brokenness in our midst. I believe that that is a part of our calling as followers of Christ. And I pray that God would give us the vision and the wisdom to know how best to do that here. You know, you hear that song, and I know you're all going to curse me after this morning that I've brought this to your attention, because it's that song that never ends, that just worms its way in your mind on and on and on. Well, I'd kind of like to think that this is the sermon that never ends, because I think really there is no end to this. There is no nice phrase to sum up the whole issue of economic stability and our sense of our stewardship and faithfulness to offer hospitality to those in need. So it's an ongoing issue that we struggle with. And I think my best words for us today is simply to say we need to continue to keep our eyes open. We need to keep looking up and look for ways that we can offer hospitality in our midst. Our calling to offer that kind of hospitality is ongoing. And may we indeed bring salvation to those who are most in need. Amen.